Well, President Trump has just designated Antifa as a terrorist group, but it's complicated. Let's talk about it. In my opinion, there are at least 4 different streams of people who want to overturn our constitutional republic. One of them is called Antifa. Now, I haven't talked about Antifa a lot before now because, quite frankly, I was hoping they would just go away. But we're about 8 years into this mess, and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon, so we're going to talk about it. First, who is Antifa? Well, the executive order has a pretty good definition in the opening paragraph. Here's the cover of the executive order. It's called Designating Antifa as a Domestic Terrorist Organization, dated September 22nd, 2025. Let's just read this opening line here. Antifa is a militaristic, anarchist enterprise that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the U.S. government, law enforcement authorities, and our system of law. This is very important because this identifies who they are and what their purpose is, what they are trying to do. It uses illegal means to organize and execute a campaign of violence and terrorism nationwide to accomplish these goals. This campaign involves coordinated efforts to obstruct enforcement of federal laws through armed standoffs with law enforcement, organized riots, violent assaults on immigration and customs enforcement and other law enforcement officers, and routine doxing of and other threats against political figures and activists. So that's a pretty good baseline definition of what Antifa is and what they're about. What I really want you to understand is that the real war is not red versus blue. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's radical leftist anarchists versus the Constitution, okay? That's what the real war is. Remember, and this is just one of the groups that I think is currently trying to overturn the government. Now, law enforcement have been kind of hesitant to engage with these violent anarchists. And when they are finally arrested, they're usually bailed out of jail in about 5 minutes. It seems like there's virtually no accountability for this group. And they seem to specialize in vandalism. And sometimes they'll get arrested on weapons charges and vandalism, but they're quickly out of jail. And that's all part of their strategy and training. Meanwhile, they've trashed our cities, created chaos, and degraded our culture. And now President Trump has officially designated Antifa as a terrorist group. Here's independent reporter Andy Ngo, who has been following this issue for about 12 years now. He's really a leading authority on who Antifa is and what they're about and how they work. Let's check out some of his statements about these recent developments.
I am pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Looking at my reaction, maybe you might be surprised for why am I not jumping down and celebrating. Well, this is going to be a real talk with you all. And I want to set realistic expectations. And I think you all should be aware of what the statement means and what can happen next. A few days ago, a journalist had asked him at a press conference if he would be doing it, and he was suggesting he was. And I think expectations were unrealistic. You know, Congress can pass various resolutions. There's been proposed resolutions to declare Antifa a terrorist organization as well that happened as far back as 2019 after I was beaten. And that one didn't pass, none of them passed, but even if they did, it would be symbolic. how come it's only symbolic? Why can't the President of the United States sign executive order and have federal law in the same way that he did on dozens of other executive orders, right? Well, first and foremost, the First Amendment and how the courts have interpreted those protections do not allow the government to ban organizations, because that would be seen as a infringement of one's free speech. It's very important. Antifa is not the only violent extremist organization in the US. We have had decades of revolutionary communists who plan terrorist activities, who call for it. We have neo-Nazi groups who have been involved in violence. The US, by law, cannot ban organizations domestically. But hope is not lost. We do have federal legislation on conspiracy and RICO crimes, which is about organized crime. And that's where we can go after people. I hope, therefore, that this statement, it's symbolic, but I hope that it's really prioritized by the Department of Justice. And it's going to be really hard and novel in a way, right? Antifa has not been prosecuted at the federal level in any cases where they did engage in organized criminality in federal jurisdictions or via attacks on federal property. There's still been ongoing attacks on the ICE facility in Portland, for example, to this day, by the way, for months now. And there's been dozens of arrestees. I think by my count, 26 have been charged. Most of them are disproportionately, they are trans or gender diverse in some way. You guys are probably not surprised to hear that. But none of them have been charged with conspiracy. They're charged with like assault with a deadly weapon, possession of an explosive device, trespass, ignoring a lawful order, those type of things, which don't really get at the heart of what's going on, you know? And I've spent now since 2017 focused on reporting on Antifa and learning their tactics and how it's evolved as well. Keep in mind that organized far-left violent militancy, those who are in a sort of leadership role, who have influence, they're very smart in learning how to evade accountability and how to evade the law. They know it. They're experts at it. This is what they do. Their whole mantra is about doing crimes and how to get away with it. Attacking journalists, for example, is one part of that. If you assault journalists, then they don't show up to report what's happening. They don't come with cameras, right? So then you eliminate one way that evidence could be gathered, right? If somebody else was there documenting things in public.
Now I want to play a short clip from another independent reporter who's also been documenting Antifa for a number of years. Here's Dr. Carlin Borisenko explaining some of the challenges she believes will be involved in cutting off the funding for Antifa groups.
Well, the Trump administration is going to have a hard time with this one. And I know people aren't going to like this, but Antifa is not a centralized organization. I think when people are saying Antifa is just an idea, it's not quite that simple. Antifa is an organization, but it is a highly decentralized organization filled up with probably at least 1,000, if not more, decentralized cells all over the country. There are some cells that call themselves Antifa, like Rose City Antifa. That's one of the most famous ones. But the vast majority of what I would consider to be Antifa organizations do not call themselves Antifa. They might call themselves something like a distro. They might call themselves an info shop. They might call themselves a collective. They might make up some other name, but there is no organization. There is no membership list. And this is the part that's really going to piss people off. There is no funding. George Soros is not funding these people. USAID is not funding these people. Antifa funds themselves via mutual aid. They steal stuff off the streets or they fund themselves via small donations. And I don't know how the Trump administration is going to track small donations that are usually made in cash across a highly decentralized network with no membership list where he doesn't even know the naming convention that they use for their cells. So there is organization, but it's very complicated.
Okay, but from a realistic perspective to those on the right who are freaking out about this, what percentage
Yeah.
do you think of like leftists are actually part of Antifa?
It's extremely hard to say, but I think more than they think. And I think that they've been recruiting at a clip ever since Trump got inaugurated into office, because what they've been doing is they've been specifically targeting, obviously, like disaffected Democrats and liberals, but also members of the DSA. Because remember, Antifa is much farther left than the DSA. The DSA is a walk in the park compared to these people. And so,
just real quick, DSA is the Democratic Socialists of America. That's who she's talking about. So Antifa is further left than the Democratic Socialists. All right, let's continue.
because remember, Antifa is much farther left than the DSA. The DSA is a walk in the park compared to these people. And so they've been targeting people to recruit them and radicalize them to the far left. And by the way, and I think you might appreciate this, the Palestine-Israel issue has been one of their main recruiting apparatuses to get people radicalized to the far left, because people are really pissed off at the Trump administration for how they're handling Israel. They're also really pissed off at the Democratic Party for how they're handling it, how no one is speaking out against the genocide in Gaza. And that has been a very big recruiting tactic for them for the last couple of years. And so I think that it's difficult to assess how many people we're talking about, but I think the problem is much bigger than most people understand.
Well, I hope that gives you some kind of introduction to what's happening with Antifa, who they are, and why fighting back against them is going to be an uphill battle. Now, that's not to say I'm not glad that the Trump administration is designating them as a domestic terrorist group. I think it's a good step, but I want you to understand what some of the challenges are that are going to be involved in that. Now, finally, I have two thoughts about all of this from a biblical perspective. First, what Andy is describing here is what happens when the pillar of accountability collapses. Now, you might know from previous teachings that I think that there are 4 foundational principles to God's standards of justice. And this is the word mishpat in Hebrew. And those 4 principles of justice are truth-telling, weighing evidence, impartiality, and accountability. Biblical standards of justice are lost, however, when one of those pillars falls down. And right now, what we are grappling with is the loss of the pillar of accountability. And then we see a rise in injustice. And in my opinion, that's basically what's been happening for the last 8 to 10 years with Antifa. There is very little accountability for their anarchy. Now, I appreciate how Andy No explains some of the challenges of prosecution in light of free speech laws and free association and those values for our way of life. But certainly Antifa is taking advantage of those things for pernicious reasons. The second thought I have about all this is that we need to ask God to raise up evangelists who have a heart to reach these anarchists with the gospel. Because truly, changed hearts is the only permanent way out of this mess. And make no mistake about it, this is a mess. If this conversation has been helpful to you, please drop a comment below. And also, please share it with someone that you think might also be interested in this issue. And don't forget to download the official Center for Biblical Unity mobile app so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. I'm going to put a link to that in the description below.